The title of this talk is APT Hunter, Enabling the Hunt for Abnormalities. Throughout the presentation, we will be providing some information. A lot of you may be familiar with it, but we're simply doing that in order to bring everyone up to a certain baseline so that they understand what the tool is and what it's doing. So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hao Wang. I'm the senior in the US cybersecurity practice, and I have been in the firm about 5 years. So I'm a pen tester. I'm also doing a little bit of IR. And since I'm originally from China, so a lot of my colleagues usually call me like Mr. Panda, Red Panda, like X Panda, but definitely not like a Deep Panda, you know, something like the name from CrowdStrike.
I'm Joshua Timer. I'm a manager with our cybersecurity practice, primarily focused on incident response and attack and penetration. Really quickly, before we even move on to the next slide, I just want to carve out, some precious seconds of our 20-minute talk to really give you some background about how. And he doesn't know that this is happening, and this is something that I've sat on for a couple of years. Okay, we travel a lot for our work, and we end up in these really remote locations, and occasionally we end up in locations where there's really nothing great to eat. And we're stuck there for weeks upon, weeks and weeks. And there was this one location where by, week 2 or 3, Hao had gotten pretty sick of the food and had decided that he had gained a little bit too much weight. And so he took it upon himself to diet. And the way Mr. Panda diets is to limit his food consumption entirely. So 2 to 3 days go by, and we finally, he's starting to look a little bit weary, like he's gonna crack. And, he doesn't show up to work the next day. And what happened to Hao? Okay. Mr. Panda had gone to KFC, ordered an entire bucket of KFC, and downed that the night before. I can tell you he lost weight the following day. All right, we'll move on. Sorry.
Okay. Motivation. So we have a story behind this tool, APT Hunter. So in 2012, both Josh and I, we were doing penetration testing for one of our clients. And during that engagement, I just randomly established an RDP connection with one of their domain controllers. And for some reason, I pressed the shift key 5 times, and then you know what happened? There was a command shell pop-up. So it turned out the client has been compromised by a specific APT threat actor for many years. Yeah, it's a sticky key backdoor. So from that, we start realizing such a tiny finding can potentially disclose the entire compromise of the enterprise. And then we came up with this idea, why don't we do a little bit threat hunting within pen testing? Since we are the attacker, so let the attacker find the attacker. Sometimes it makes sense.
Yeah, and so really, it became apparent to us that if we could just find any sort of abnormal behavior within the network, we may be able to actually find something. And so this tool really developed out of that. And this is an ugly tool. We're not afraid to call our baby ugly. And we don't even like the name of our baby, quite honestly. But we started with something small where we said, okay, let's find these backdoors. We slowly compounded and just kind of added on to it. So the main objective of the tool was really to try to find or try to build something that we could use. We're only on site for a week or two. How do we hunt for threats within our current work stream? And so we wanted to do this using an agentless approach. And it's simply because if you've ever worked with a client and you're trying to deploy an agent, all types of arguments come out, and there's full-on baselines for CPU, and it's an argument thing. So we wanted to be able to very quickly scan the environment, do it as lightweight as possible, and just really get back results so that we could take what we have and actually start hunting. So that's how we kind of arrived at this.
Okay, so right now the tool is written by VB script 100%. And so what the tool does right now is going to establish remote connection, which is WMI connection to remote host, and then pull system artifact at system level, memory level, and then we are going to parse them locally, store in the CSV files.
Yeah, and so we're currently in the process of porting it over to PowerShell, making it a little bit more modular. But we started with something, we just keep it we kept adding it, and this is where we're at this point. So right now, the tool capabilities kind of covers different parts of the attack lifecycle. I know this isn't complete, and I know we have a laundry list of things that we still intend to add. We just kind of add it in our free time. Anything from enumeration, privilege escalation, all the way to some persistence mechanisms. A lot of this stuff has kind of been covered today. For the sake of the talk, we're just going to highlight a few of the things that our tool does, and so at least you can try to get some understanding of what you're looking at. So the first thing that we want to talk about is a lot of people have mentioned shim cache, but there's other caches, right? So we're just looking for any sort of abnormal file execution, and this doesn't even have to be complex, but there's different layers of complexity in the hunt. And I can tell you that even some of these basic tactics will find something in environments. So this is anything from poorly named files that I can tell you during breaches, attackers get lazy, especially if you're getting the C or D team. Anything in regards to very common executables that are used, certain executables that are running from non-standard locations. And so how we'll just kind of walk through those as it pertains to our tool.
Yeah, so shim cache, I know a lot of people mentioned that today, so we just need to give a small overview about shim cache. So shim cache is used by Microsoft mainly look up program application which require shimming for compatibility issues. And thank you for the great work done by Mandin, and they discovered the metadata of shim cache can be used to potentially track file execution. So within shim cache, there are a lot of useful information, including file name, file size, and file path. So, yeah.
Yeah, all I was going to say is yesterday there were some references to trying to pull the whole shim database. We're trying to do this as quickly as possible. The tool probably takes about 10 to 20 seconds on each host. Obviously, there's ways to deploy it en masse, or there's ways to just kind of do a sweep. And so we don't necessarily pull all these files down. We're parsing them, and we're pulling specific things out of the registry and using them. So yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe next one. So here is one of the examples from our tool. So basically, how does the tool work? So it's going to pull shim cache data from all the remote hosts, and we are going to parse them locally, output them to a single CSV file, so which will be much easier for people to analyze, search, stacking. So one of my favorite search from shim cache output is ps-exec service executable. So there are a couple reasons behind that. First, the service executable of ps-exec is a true evidence of ps-exec execution on the target system. And for most time, the modification date of ps-exec service executable is its creation time. And what's more, so for those shim cache entries which locate close to the ps-exec service executable, those are typically the binary files executed by ps-exec. So from this one, we can see something called wc-u-exe probably was executed by ps-exec, right? So, but how can we know this file is bad? So shim cache can give you file size and a file name. So with those two information, you probably can just search against your direct intelligence resources, or even just make a Google. So you probably, if you are lucky, you can find that file from website.
Yeah, right? it really doesn't have to be that complicated. Yeah. And this is an example, and it seems overly simplified, but this is something that we have seen in an active breach.
Exactly. So aim cache. So then we are going to talk about aim cache, recent file cache. So those two cache can be used to track recent file execution, application creation, things like that. And so this is like, so what's the difference between aim cache and recent file cache? So aim cache will give you a lot of information than recent file cache. It even includes the SHA-1 hash, the PE information, and a couple of different timestamps for the executable file. So our tool will do the same thing, right? It's going to pull the aim cache data from remote system, parse them, store them into the CSV file. And we did the same thing for recent file hash. So once you have all the output from those three hashes, right, like shim cache, recent file cache, aim hash, then you can do your hunting, right? Especially if you know what you are looking for, like if you know some bad name and bad file name, bad file size. You can use those information to identify if there are other hosts in your network got compromised.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be that complicated, right? So Rob earlier talked about riding a bicycle, right? This could be riding a tricycle, right? So you're starting with, you're running this, you're just trying to figure out what's happening in your environment. And the reality is a majority of clients don't actually know what's happening in their environment. So in this instance, sorry, okay. In this instance, if you run this on a daily basis and you compare the deltas, the differences between from day to day, a lot of times you can actually figure out what's happening and figure out what's actually being run. The next thing that the tool does is, and I know sticky keys have been mentioned before, but this is something that kind of started the whole project, so we feel endeared to it a little bit. And sticky keys are just designed for people who can't hold down 2 or more keys at the same time. And so the way this works is 2 ways. An attacker either replaces certain accessibility programs within an operating system so that when that accessibility program is called, it's actually calling something else, or 2, modifies the registry, and that registry will launch, has a debugger feature that will, at that point, launch the file that's executed. So in this case, when someone is attempting, or when someone actually has a sticky key backdoor on the system, all they do is end up triggering accessibility options without ever logging in. And they're able to get system-level access to those machines. And this is a great way for a native backdoor on a number of systems. And it's something that they kind of scatter throughout. I can tell you that agents, some popular agents out there have started actually adding this back in. I know it's been around forever, but it's still showing up. The other thing, just really quickly to note, is that network-level authentication doesn't solve this. We have some clients that turn on NLA and they think, at this point they're safe. That's not the case.
Yeah, I can give you one example. Like, let's say a regular domain user did RDP connection to one of the compromised server, and then they can just press the shift key 5 times, and then they can get a system-level command prompt. So the user isolated their privilege from regular domain user account to a system-level privilege on that specific compromised system.
So the way this tool works is a little bit different. And a lot of places, what they do is they compare the hashes against the command prompt. In our case, this tool is comparing the file description. And if that description is actually different than what you're expecting, so if you're calling an accessibility option and you end up seeing that Windows command processor is actually being called, you have a problem on your hands. And so what we're doing, rather than comparing all those hashes, is just comparing that file description. And then the second thing is just querying registry keys for any sort of indicator of a backdoor. And here's an example of the tool output. If you're okay with Excel, you can use the tool. So.
Okay, WMI persistence. So WMI persistence has become a really popular topic right now, maybe for the past 2 years, because the attackers, the bad people, are actually really using that. And people can right now start discovering this in the incident response. And so WMI can be used to create a persistent malicious payload through something called the WMI event subscription, right? So to create a malicious WMI subscription, you need 3 main components. The first one is called the event consumer, which contains all the malicious payload. The second one, we call that event filter, which is the condition to trigger the specific payload. And the second one is the filter to consumer banding. So it will tell you which condition is used to trigger which payload. And so far, we did a lot of research about this. So we found one of the most effective way to detect this is to enumerate all the WMI instances for a number of WMI classes and for a lot of hosts. And then we do large-scale stacking analysis. So here's one of the example, right? So we enumerate one WMI consumer, and then we saw something like a PowerShell is executing, is calling some payload over there. So it's easy just to figure that out. It's bad, right? If you find something similar in your environment, then there is an issue. So the other thing is, if you use something to some WMI class to create some WMI filter, there may be some registry key created after the system reboot. For example, so if you use Win32 local time to create a filter to tell the payload to execute at 12:15 p.m. every day, then there will be a registry key called Win clock provider created. So our script will specifically look for those artifacts. If we find one, we are going to put that to the output.
Yeah, another thing that's been mentioned throughout the conference is Mimikatz, and it keeps coming up, and it's something that is extremely popular because attackers have been able to use the tool to extract clear text credentials. It's taken the element of password hashes and cracking those password hashes kind of out of the equation. And I think that's why it's probably so popular. In newer versions of Microsoft, what they've done is actually tried to combat this. And there's a setting within these systems, and by default, it comes, these hosts come shipped with this enabled, so it prevents the storage of clear text credentials. This is a registry key. There's a lot of attacker tools out there that are starting to flip this key back and forth. So what they're doing is, if they're targeting a specific system, they're flipping the registry key, they're getting the logon, the clear text credentials, and they're just kind of flipping it back. It's almost automated at this point. And so this isn't rocket science. All we're doing is querying that registry key. If you see that key being flipped, at that point, you know something's probably going on. So it's an abnormality that you wouldn't expect to see, and the tool is querying that key and pulling that out. So if it is seeing this, at that point, you know something may be wrong. And so here it is. All it's simply doing is calling it out wherever it finds it. And so.
Yeah. So schedule task. We know read from CrowdStrike talk about this a lot, so we are not going to spend too much time on this. So our tool is going to do the same thing. Basically, mainly the tool is going to look for all the at jobs on the file system. If the tool finds one, they are going to pull them, parse them, and store them into the single CSV file for your analysis. Maybe we go to the next one.
Yeah, it's pretty common with Metasploit. Some of their persistence mechanisms a lot of times use these.
Exactly. Like from the parsed output, if you find something like a single character.batch file, single character.exe, something you don't know, something you are not familiar, it's maybe good to spend some time to doing some investigation.
Yeah, the next thing we kind of look for is we're pulling rogue services, and a lot of times, and this is nothing that's new, but it's just building context. Essentially, we're dropping on site, and we're trying to do this as quickly as possible. We haven't even really allocated a budget for it, but we like hunting, and we're there anyway, and the client never caught us, so we might as well do some hunting. And so in some of these instances, you can often see where the service caption is a little bit off, or the job is set to be hidden from the user and to auto start. And so that's kind of a brief overview of the tool. It doesn't take anything to run it. It's a VB script. It just takes the privilege that was kind of described earlier on in the talk. There's a few things, if you really want to get the most out of this tool, and you actually want to start going through this, there's a few things that you can do. One is, if possible, run this on a golden image. Take the things that are found on the golden image and kind of whitelist that stuff against all of your output. And that just leaves the leftover. The other thing we recommend to do is kind of use a tiered approach. If you're targeting domain controllers, if you're targeting servers, if you're targeting workstations, those builds are probably a little bit different. Use it on a set of hosts that are very similar. The other thing we'd say is probably start with a small population and kind of work your way out. The other thing that we briefly want to touch on is the fact that efficiencies can be gained. So we've been on breaches where clients don't have any sort of endpoint intelligence, and we've localized this and used an AV vendor's product to push our script and run our script and pull everything back. It requires a little bit of modification, but we'll probably end up posting an example of that so that you can kind of use that. At the same time, all the output is CSV. It's very human readable. You can take this, you can have it run on a daily basis and just ingest it into your processes already. You can already build rules on it and just kind of use that. So.
Yeah, and another thing I want to mention, like we know there are many tools out there. You can use them to pull whatever data you want, right? But I think the most important part is about how you want to utilize those data, how you created some creative ideas to analyze those data.
Yeah, and we're not saying this is honestly, if we see endpoint agents and there's some maturity there, that's great. All we're simply saying is, we're running into situations where basic things are not being caught. Hygiene that was discussed before really is neglected. And so why not just do something in order to start hunting? That's it. Any questions?
So you said, of course, this tool requires local administrator access to get any useful data out. Are you suggesting that people use this tool broadly just by using their administrative access to the endpoints and then pushing out by WMI? Or what are you guys doing in your workflow? How do you gain that access, and what type of machines are you running them on during your engagements?
Okay, so we're pen testers, so we usually end up with all the access. So it becomes relatively easy to run. Sorry to say that. But with that being said, we typically run it on a set of hosts. So at a domain admin level, we'll run it just across the domain controllers. On a server level, we'll run it across the server. A lot of times we're coordinating with the client as well. And we're just temporarily setting up something, running it, and expiring everything afterwards. So.
Yeah. And everything is done by network level authentication, so
but
there's no credential cache on the remote.
Yeah, that's right. And with that, all of that being said, there are still ways to kind of push this with an endpoint and running this. It just requires a little bit of modification, and this is something that we can probably end up putting up.
Yeah, like in the next few weeks, we are going to release another a standalone version of the tool, so you can use the ICCM and SAP to push the VB script to the endpoint to capture the data and output it to a file share.
Yeah, it's just something, you may not be able to ride your bike, but at least ride your trike, Just ride a little tricycle or something.
Yeah, we will do that at the end of today.
You didn't?
We didn't do that yet.
You did it?
Yeah.
Okay. It'll go up, yeah.
And it will be there.
Can it be run remotely, or does it need to be pushed to the individual client?
No, right now we run it remotely.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just something that you can just kind of integrate into a process and have it just kick off and run. So.
I guess the issue I have with this, as opposed to an endpoint agent that runs in the kernel space, is the potential for rootkits. That when you use just an account to query the machine remotely, there's always the chance that there is a rootkit on that machine, and the results you get back is completely false or inaccurate.
Yeah, so we're not advocating not to use an endpoint. Don't think that's what we're talking about. We're simply providing an alternative if you want to hunt and if you don't have that capability. So wholeheartedly, if a client has capabilities that we can use, we'll use those capabilities. There's no reason to use this, especially if the client has that type of insight. But the reality is, unfortunately, this has found multiple breaches, and it's not even our intent to find that. It's just something that we end up doing. So, any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.